أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق سبع سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسئا وهو حسير ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا ألقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو جهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكل من رزقه وإليه النشور. صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Assalamu alaikum jami'an. So this is our first session as the Islamic Library for the season, and we want to orient our programs around the youth and the parents, inshallah, and encourage and hope that we have more dialogue and open discussions that can happen between the two. So today's topic, inshallah, is the topic of manners. So what are manners? Manners is something that's familiar to all of us, but could be understood differently depending on who you ask. Now, Islam sets a very stringent set of boundaries for our values, but even within that, we can have different mannerisms. This is highlighted more so in today's times where, as Muslims, our understanding of self-respect and how to respect others comes into clash with the people we interact with on a day-to-day basis in the West. Similarly, we could branch out to the individual family, and we can see that, like, even in the same household, oftentimes parents and children have different understandings and cultural leniencies, and that's often contributed due to the generation gap. So to discuss this topic and more, Please welcome Samahat Sheikh Sami Ftouni and Samahat Sheikh Ali Nazal with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
Working? Hello? Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Before we begin, let us remember the Muslimin and the Mu'mineen, the Mujahideen, and recite Surah Al-Fatiha for them. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I remember when I was asked, when Sheikh Sami asked me to kind of participate with him in this session, and I was given the title Manners Matter, I was remembered of something that happened with me. I was attending a session by one of the Sada, one of the Sayyids, one of the ulama in Qom, and it was Laylat al-Qadr. And so in Laylat al-Qadr, you bring your Quran, you bring Mafatih al-Jinan, and so on and so forth. And I'm sitting there, and I have the Mafatih al-Jinan on top of the Quran. And I remember this young scholar looks at me, he smiles, but then he lifts Mafatih al-Jinan up, and subhanAllah, I'm doing the same mistake right now. Lifts, right, Mafatih al-Jinan up, and he places it underneath the Quran. And that struck me. And no, look at that adab, look at those manners towards the Quran. Even Mafatih al-Jinan, which has Quran in it, it's so sensitive for the Sayyid that he felt the need, the necessity to take Mafatih al-Jinan and place it underneath the Quran, to respect the Quran. And I remember when I came back, and it was also Laylatul Qadr, and I was looking at a lot of the shabab, a lot of the youth, they had the Quran. They had copies of the Quran. And almost all of them had the Quran on the ground next to their feet, or they had their feet stretched out towards the Quran. And I said, subhanallah, look at the difference. Look at how we've become. Not because they're bad people. I'm not saying that any of them were bad, but that's just simply, we don't have that habit. We don't have those manners in this community. We weren't raised that way. Even when me and Sheikh Sami, we both attend GRA, and we have Salat al-Jama'ah. And a lot of times the same thing, even though I'm not a scholar like of any sort of caliber, and I don't deserve any respect, but in the sense that I'm the Imam of the Jama'ah, and you turn around and you find the students, they have their feet stretched out towards you. That's fine. Like, it's not fine, right? There's a problem there, not because of me, not because of who I am, but because of the position, the station. Imagine me doing that to one of my teachers when I'm in Qom. Or even the simple fact that when we used to go to Qom, the moment the teacher comes into the room, we all stand up. And then we wait for him to sit down, for us to sit down. Those things mean something. They have that certain adab, those certain customs, those habits, they mean something. When you come back to this community, one of the things that I'm not shocked, because I grew up in this community. I know where or why it's the case, right? We weren't taught this way. And when we were going to school, we were never taught this way, to stand up when the teacher, right? And to sit down when the teacher sits down, or to even respect the teacher, and that type of respect, and that the teacher was never afforded that respect by us. And so it wasn't shocking, but for me to come back and see that, it was sort of eye-opening. And that idea that this community does in many ways, even though we are Muslims, even though we are the Shia of Ali ibn Abi Talib, even though we recite Dua Qumail, even though we recite the Quran, we're missing the basic stuff, the basic adab. Adab, when I think of adab, I'm thinking automatically also of adab as-salat. Samahat al-Sayyid al-Imam, he wrote adab as-salat, the manners, right? The manners of the prayer, the mysteries of the prayer. And when the Sayyid al-Imam, the author, Imam al-Khumaini, Radwanullah ta'ala alayh, when he's talking about ruku', when he's talking about sujood, when he's talking about qiyam, qira'ah, reciting the Quran, when he's talking about adhan, iqamah, he's telling us that we have to maintain a certain adab because we're before Allah Azza wa Jal. There should be a reverence before Allah Azza wa Jal. There should be that feeling that you're in the presence of Allah Azza wa Jal. You're standing before Allah Azza wa Jal. And so you always have to maintain a manner. You always have to, there's proper adab that you have to maintain while standing before Allah Azza wa Jal. And so now when I was in Qom and I was reading there was a small risala, a small like letter to the students of knowledge written by Hassan Zada Amali. And when one of his recommendations to the Tullab, he said that your adab has to be constant. You're always that proper adab with Allah Azza wa Jalla at all times, whether in salat or outside of salat. Meaning there's a constant remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal. There's always a reverence before Allah Azza wa Jal. Whether I'm sleeping, whether I'm talking to people, whether I'm sitting down. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, this is one book that I highly recommend. It's a very skillful translation. It's a collection of hadith going back to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, about the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. It was compiled by Allama Tabatabai and it was translated into English. And you look at his adab. How did he, when going to sleep, when starting to eat, when sitting with people, when dealing with his family members, in salat, so on and so forth. It's all here. But the common thread, right, is that Allah Azza wa Jal, that ubudiyya, that worship, that constant reverence of Allah Azza wa Jal. So in some ways, I say the first stepping stone for us is to recognize that for us, salah isn't just supposed to be mechanical. It's supposed to be something that transcends even, right, the prayer mat. It should turn into that. There should be a transformation. So that's the first thing that we want to recognize. Everything that Sayyid al-Imam, if we open up that book, Adab al-Salat, that when he talks about that moderation, that middle point between fear and hope, that fear of Allah Azza wa Jal, but hope for that Jannah, that constant sort of feeling. You never have too much fear that you lose hope, and you never have too much hope that you feel secure from the hellfire. You're always in that moderate state. You're in that middle position. We should transform that. We should take that also and apply it to all our everyday, ordinary interactions in life. That's the first stepping stone. That's what I think that we're missing. We're really missing that thing where our entire lives are oriented around Allah Azza wa Jal. That's going to take a lot. But we have the help of the Quran. So Hassan Zada Amani, in that same treatise, in that same letter to the Tullab, he says if you go to Surah Al-Furqan, all the way at the end of Surah Al-Furqan, he says that's the blueprint, that's the constitution of the believer. And I'm going to read them, I'm going to recite them now, I'm going to translate them a little bit, but I'm going to leave it to the discussion. I'm going to leave it to Sheikh Sami also to introduce his kind of introductory comments, and then we'll have a conversation. But I want you to think of that proper adab that we're lacking when it comes to even the simple things, right? And why is it that we're lacking it? We're lacking it because we don't have that reverence. We don't have that reverence before Allah. We don't feel the presence of Allah Azza wa Jal. That's my, if you want to say, my diagnosis. But now I'm going to go in what way, if we've diagnosed that, how can we help? What do we have that's going to give us kind of sort of tell us how to act or how to observe, or what is that one thing that we can draw inspiration from? And it's Surah Al-Furqan. Hassan Zada Amali says the last part of Surah Al-Furqan is the constitution of the believer. And he starts by saying, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وعباد الرحمن الذين يمشون على الأرض هونا. So it's the servants of the compassionate, عباد الرحمن. And they say that they walk on the earth. They walk on the earth how? With humility. They're not walking arrogantly. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam says about the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, that the Prophet used to be energetic. When he used to walk, he was energetic, but he was never arrogant. He wouldn't walk on the ground like a tyrant. You can think of a king. You can think of someone that's walking on the ground very arrogantly. Obviously, the one that comes to mind is Trump, right? You think of Trump, you think, right? He's walking, very arrogant. Ibadur Rahman, no, they're walking on the earth with humility. They recognize, they're looking at the mountains, they're looking at everything around them, the phenomenon, the created universe around them, and they see how their smallness, they see their weakness, they recognize the strength of Allah Azza wa Jal. They recognize their own inherent poverty. So that's the first thing. It's not just simply walking. It's not just the manner that we walk. If you look at the commentaries, it seems that this idea, this sort of feeling, this attitude is sort of something that pervades everything else. It pervades all your actions. So now all my actions, you're going to think of that, عِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا, with humility. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And if they're addressed by the ignorant, how do they respond? They respond peace, salam. And then يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجْدًا وَقِيَامًا. سُجِّدًا وَقِيَامًا. That's the idea that they pray to Allah Azza wa Jal in prostration and standing. وَيَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا اصْرِفْ عَنَّا عَذَابَ جَهَنَّمَ إِنَّ عَذَابَهَا كَانَ غَرَامًا إِنَّهَا سَاءَتْ مُسْتَقِرًّا وَمُقَامًا وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. This idea, this is another principle that it gives me. I'm just going to read it would be easier to read the English translation that I have here. And those who say, O Lord, avert from us the torment of hell. Wretched is it as a residence and abode. Those who, when they spend, are neither wasteful nor stingy, nor ungenerous. And they strike a balance. Look what it says. It says, those, but something reasonable in between. And so you're seeing some of the how to maintain that proper adab. There's always going to be a moderation. There's always going to be striking a in between two extremes. When you think of courage, when you think of recklessness, right? When you think of someone who lacks courage, someone who's afraid of the battlefield, he runs away from the battlefield, but at the same time, the extreme of that would be recklessness. And so we don't want either of the two. We want to be in between. And the same thing the Quran is saying. You're neither going to be stingy nor ungenerous, but you're also not going to be wasteful. You're going to strike a balance. And so the mu'min is someone who strikes a balance in everything that he does. And it goes back to, it maps onto that thing that that principle, that core principle that Sayyid Imam talked about, where it's always a balance between hope and fear. But these are some of the ayat. There's more ayat to read. But me just reading them and reading the translation, I just feel like it will drag on. So I just want that as our starting point. Surah Al-Furqan, Ibadur Rahman, the idea that we're kind of maintaining, or we're observing that proper adab with Allah Azza wa Jal, whether on the prayer mat or outside of the prayer mat, so to speak. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنتم شيخ علي. Thank you for bringing the topic to light, Sheikh Ali, and with the points he mentioned, and bring a different approach to the concept of manners, and kind of specify and emphasize on the idea of how society has adapted to the different types of manners we have today. I'd like to start with the nice example Sheikh Ali gave about the Quran and the Mafatih al-Jinan. So when it came to that concept, even when it comes to the concept of books, and whether it's in a library, whether they're on a table, we see that there's this type of ethical hierarchy even with the books themselves, and it doesn't just stop with books. The way society is built, or the way the world is built around the concepts of ethics, it shows that everything has a type of hierarchy, whether it's in terms of books, food, the way you eat food. Also, we're advised in what to start with, what to end with, what not to eat with what. And then we can also extend it to humans, how to interact, how to socialize. If you're speaking to a parent, if you're speaking to a coworker, if you're speaking to your siblings, friends, if you're speaking to a store owner, whatever it is, we see that Islam kind of, as Sheikh Ali mentioned, gives us a constitution or blueprint in how we should go about things. And the reason is because the world is built around us in a structure which is based off of cause and effect. So everything you do has an effect to it. If you act in a certain way, the person next to you or around you, and even it could extend to other parts of the world, will be affected by the way you act, by what you say. Because again, this ripple effect that takes place doesn't just start and end with you. It kind of starts with you and escalates to the people around you, and in turn, after that, escalates to others around you as well. And this is why we see when it comes to akhlaq, there are key concepts and certain vices that we are advised to stay away from. For example, if we talk about backbiting, when the idea of backbiting comes into play, we kind of don't understand the root of backbiting and the effects it has on society. We kind of take it as simple as, oh, it's something bad, but if I do it, I can get away with it. But if we kind of digest and dissect the idea of backbiting, we see that the person that you're talking about or speaking illy about will in turn be affected. But at the same time, the person you're speaking to is taking kind of a understanding of you. If you're speaking about this other person, what's stopping this person from speaking about me? But while you're doing this, you're not kind of processing what's going on there. And in turn, what happens? You're spreading negativity. You know, this person's now taking this negative aspect of you, he's going to relay it to someone else, and then others are going to start knowing about these things. And now you created this dynamic around you in which people are now looking at you in a negative way. They're going to be very careful in what they say in front of you. They're going to probably try to avoid you. And this in turn, what has it done to your social status? It's destroyed it. People are now looking at you in a way that is diminishing your character in society, your personality in society. And this is why the Quran kind of emphasizes on backbiting the way it does. It tries to give it a disgusting look, trying to compare the idea that it's like eating not just the flesh or the meat of any person, but even the people that are closest to you. That's how distasteful it is. That's how disgusting it is. And in turn, he's trying to tell us this is how effectful it is in society. This is how you're looked at in society. Just as disgusting and distasteful this is what your character is now perceived in society on that same weight and that same level. And the idea now extends even further. The concept here is that we live in a society now, and it's being adapted not only in the West, but now also in the East, where the social hierarchy is no longer there. What we now have is what we call independence, something, it revolves around you as a person now. It doesn't revolve around God or you reaching that state close to or near God. It's revolving around you. And this is what the concept or the idea that's being pushed right now in public schools, especially. When we come to the public sector, this positive behavior and the social emotional awareness that they're trying to push on this child is to let them understand that everything revolves around you. You're the important person. You're independent. Your parents need to fix to your needs. We need to fix to your needs. Whatever happens, we need to make sure you're comfortable. Okay? Instead of letting them understand that there is a hierarchy there. There's times where I've dealt with people in programs just when it comes to the structure of the family. I'm not saying we're the best when it comes to this, but we try our best. But when it comes to building some families, for example, some tasks that you give them and they find it very hard to adapt to. For example, if one family one time came up and said, I'm having trouble connecting with my family and them understanding my role as a father in the house, and what the wife is to me, and then how they should be with each other. So a simple solution that was put forth for them was just try to introduce the concept of jama'ah in the house, salat al-jama'ah. In this way, automatically, when the child is praying behind you, they see that you're the person in front, you're leading the house, even the mom is behind you and she's following you. So the social hierarchy or status of the house is now being fixated in a specific act. And it's something that no one has an opinion on, because it's a religious duty. The mom can't say, no, I want to lead the prayer. Or the father say, let's let's take it easy. Um, you go ahead and pray and I'll pray behind you, I'll follow you. No, there's a certain structure there in which the family is organized around, and it kind of embeds that idea there, you know. And then we have other concepts that Islam introduces that, for example, eating together on the table, especially when it comes to Shahr Ramadan, you know, it's highly emphasized that if your family's eating on the table and they're starting without you, leave the prayer, wait on the prayer, okay? Because what's more important is the connecting to that social aspect of why Shahr Ramadan is there. Prayer is important, but there's here something more important, you know, because one can be pushed to the side for a certain time frame, but the other one has limited time to it, you know. Right here we go to the concept, you know, taqdim al-aham ala al-muhim. In this lahza right here that you're in, this instance that you're in, what is more important during this time? So we kind of need to understand when it comes to the family structure, this is Islam gives us the guidelines, gives us the blueprints and how to move forward with it. We just have to kind of analyze and understand it. And one thing that I do want to emphasize on is keep up to date, whether we're children or we're parents. Keep up to date on what or how society is influencing us. Um, there's a lot of things that we are oblivious to. We don't realize, you know, things that maybe it takes strong concentration for you to actually pick up that these messages are being inserted slowly but surely into our kids or even into our minds, you know. The message doesn't have to just be there all at once. The way that the society works is it can wait 5 years for a certain message to get to you. As long as that message gets to you, they're not losing anything. Their whole goal isn't to get that message across, it's to be productive in their sense, to make sure that it gets to you in that proper way, you know. So these are things that we need to concentrate on. Social media is the biggest hazard here. Social media, when it comes to our kids, or if you're kids yourself, is something that we have to be very careful of. The way that it is, you know, wrapped and portrayed to us in a specific way that we have to be on it. You know, we have to be up to date with the trends, with the things that are there. These are all things that affect us. Um, you walk into a public school right now. I've walked into many in the past month, in the hallways, in classes, especially the high schoolers. Phones are there, you know, phones are with them wherever they go. Okay. Um, and this is now what's happening is their life has become very robotic. You know, it's very binary. That's what social media does. You know, everything that's being brought to us, and the world is only changing to the future. Okay. uh, and becoming much harder, you know. When I just look at, for example, AI, Chat GPT, things that now take the way we think from us, you know, we're no longer able to perfect ourselves or allow ourselves to grow because they've made things so easy for us out there, where what could take you time and allow you to become more perfect as a human being because of the way you're processing and thinking about things is now something that you just find on the internet, or you ask this AI program to find for you and to type up for you. So now we're becoming the robots, you know. We're no longer thinking. We're no longer there's if you go research some things, you know, so I'm invited to a party. How can I fit in? This is what they ask the AI. The AI is telling them now how to act socially. You know, this is the trends that we're in right now, you know, because we're scared and embarrassed because we no longer know how to act in front of people or what people, we want to be that perfect person. And we rely on the data that's collected to tell us that. And we no longer look at what's important, which is our religion and our deen that guides us in this way. So there's much to talk about this topic. I know we're short on time and we wanted to open the floor to the audience as well. I think we touched on key points. So if anyone wanted to expand on those, inshallah, we can go from there. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل
Okay, so I guess thank you, Sheikh Sami and Sheikh Ali. We'll start with the question and answer now. So maybe we can alternate between the sisters and brothers, and we'll start with the sisters first. anyone wants to raise their hand, I can pass the mic. Or the brothers, if there's no
Hello,
question.
maybe hello. As it kind of gets warmed up, we'll kind of maybe we'll start a discussion, just me and Sheikh Sami, and then you guys will just kind of interrupt us. Hassan Zada Amali. So, yeah, okay. Yeah, so Sheikh Hassan Zada Amali was one of the students. He came from one of the students of Allama Tabatabai, alongside Ayatollah Jawadi Amali, alongside Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. So he was one of the philosopher, kind of a very prominent philosopher, theologian, but also an editor of a lot of books. I know he edited and commented on Kashf al-Murad for Allama Hilli. So he was a prominent scholar who recently passed, but he was one of the students of Allama Tabatabai. I just wanted to kind of speak on some of the points that Sheikh Sami said, and that this idea that individualism. When I was looking at Confucianism, which is very prominent in the East, it's an Eastern religion. It's debatable whether it is a religion, but it's a school of life. It's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. They have many thoughts about the same way that we have thoughts about hierarchy and social norms and so on and so forth. But if you look at China, for example, even when it comes to the government, the way the people are interacting with the government, right? The reason why China doesn't have a democratic problem, right? So this idea of democracy, when you think of the West, you think of the West being a paradigm of a model of democracy and free market economics, right? And so they have those two things are called the Washington Consensus. Opposed to that is something called the Beijing Consensus. And it's coming from a different school of life, a different philosophy. And it trickles down to students in the classroom. You see that Chinese students are completely different than American students. And the reason for that is because of Confucianism and Confucian, right? And what he taught. And the one most important thing that he taught was that idea of hierarchy, that idea of respecting, right, the father, respecting the grandfather, and so on and so forth, and even respecting the ruler. And here's the thing that kind of sort of fascinates me, is that when you look at Confucianism, it's been able to sort of resist Western sort of I don't know what to call it, like Western sort of clash of civilizations, ما بعرف شو بدي أسميها, right? So this onslaught, right? This Western onslaught. And Islam, and it's not just us here, and it's not just us in Dearborn that haven't been able to resist that sort of the individualism and the atheism and the secularism and all those other isms and all those other schools that are completely foreign to our religion. But that when you look at even in Lebanon, when you look at Iran, it's kind of it's having an impact. Why? Why is it that us Muslims have left our religion? It's just become a formality. It's become something where we just go to Ramadan, Shahr Ramadan, and then there's this idea of iftar and there's this idea of salah. But in more, if you look at Dearborn now, we're liberals, we're like Democrats, right? We have no basic, and when it comes to politics, we're completely swept away. Like we're swept away by the Democratic Party, and we're not resistant to any of those norms, to the most part. Why? That's the question that has to be asked. And then, have we really understood Islam? What's going on? What's the problem? Even when you now look at Dubai, Dubai isn't following a Dubai model. It's not following Saudi Arabia isn't following its own model that's based on the East, that's based on Al-Arab wal Muslimin. It's based on the West. But why is Singapore and why is, for example, China and Japan, why can they retain? Japan, that's debatable. You can say after the occupation, right? It kind of sort of withered away. That sort of the ethos of us, right? The kind of the idea or the image of a samurai. But what Sheikh Sami said was on point. This idea when it comes to adab, when I was talking about that reverence before Allah Azza wa Jal, you're recognizing a hierarchy. He's the creator. I'm the created. He's the right. Huwa maliki yawmiddin. I'm the servant. What he was also saying is that trickles down to the mother, the father, and so on and so forth. To add a story, now because we're in a library, it might make sense to bring up this example. One of the biggest libraries in Qom is one that was built by and established by Al-Najafi, Sayyid Marashi. And Sayyid Marashi, there's this beautiful story where Sayyid Marashi's mom asked him to go, he was a young kid, and asked him to go wake up his father. And so he wanted to listen to his mom, so he went up to wake up his father. He found his father sleeping. And so he didn't want to bother his father. What am I going to do? This is like a problem, right? I mean, for us, it's a problem. Like I don't want to go back to my mom without having woken up my father, and I don't want to wake up my father and disturb him. What am I to do? So he goes and he puts his cheeks on his father's feet and gently wakes him up to show him that sort of that proper reverence. When I said this story to some of my students, they looked at me like, what are you talking about? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's wrong with him? Like, why would he do that? We've lacked, we're lacking the basic the manners don't apply anymore. Even in everyday interactions, even in the musalla, even on the prayer mat, it's gone. Reason why it's gone is individualism, I believe. We've sort of replaced the idea of Islam with something else. Guys, ask, because if it just becomes a discussion between
I
me
guess
and
we'll
Sheikh Sami,
start
you guys
with-
are gonna, it's not gonna be a nice night.
اوكي اول شيء يعطيكم الف
الله
عافيه.
يعافيك.
اوكي subject is very good والله. هذا البوينت about we are missing a very big point بالنسبه للمانرز. عم تخلق جاب كبير جاب in the Quran. وقضى ربك ألا تعبدوا إلا إياه وبالوالدين إحسانا.
أحسن.
So we learned that the first teaching that's most important socially after the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the respect and adherence to our parents.
Yeah.
So my question, or if you would like to elaborate, how important it is to go back and strengthen that link that we skipped in our life somewhere, okay, and respecting parents in almost everything, and it reaches to the point of being obedient.
Yeah.
And I know this is something strange maybe for the new generations, but I think we probably have to go back and discuss it and dissect it and see how important it is, because you guys just mentioned now that could be really the main reason or the main issue where we started losing manners.
Yeah.
And if you like to expand this and elaborate on it a little bit more.
That's your area of expertise.
So the question is a very good question, and it's multi-layered, as I always like to explain it. So the concept, as the Hajj mentioned, is yani the weight that God is giving to respecting the parents is on the level that comes right after worshiping God, or obeying God. And to combine it in one siyaq, as they say, when it comes to a verse, it's not two different verses, it's in one siyaq, comparing the two, it's kind of giving it more emphasis as well. Now, when it comes to the children kind of understanding or obeying or respecting the parents, the idea here falls on a principle, and as they say, there's a lot of key logical principles that we live by, one being, faqid al-shay' la yu'ti. Here there's a type of fuqdan that's happening there with the child, something that they've had when they were little, okay, because again, the concept of fuqdan is you had something but then you lose it, you no longer have it. So when they're young and they're still on that fitrah, you see that they to their parents, they're there, because by nature, by design, they have to rely on them in that sense. So there's a certain aspect or transition in life that happens in which now the child is detached from the parents into a certain extent. And the thing is, we can't deny that it's not just from the child. The detachment comes from the parent as well. And it's unfortunate, just as society from one end is injecting this idea of individualism into the children, at the same time it's withdrawing the parents by keeping them busy, for example, in societal matters such as working. Now the way society has become, And it's all built this way, you know. Again, if you go to by the cause and effect, we're in times now where no longer the father is enough to work, you know. Now the mother needs to be the second uh, bill payer in the, yes, in the house, you know. So when the kid comes home, he's no longer coming to a comfortable environment. He's coming to tiring parents. He's coming to parents where if they're at school 8 hours a day, they only see them 2 hours maximum, for example, at home. And the parent, in retrospect, doesn't feel like giving that energy at this time, even though he might want to. But then now it starts to adapt into a norm where they didn't feel like giving it is now, oh, I don't have to give it anymore. You know, they have things they're being busy with. Let's put them in programs. I don't need to be there. They have homework, they have television. So now we're kind of allowing society to shape our children and not us shape them and ourselves, you know. So if you were to cling on to that nature aspect of the child when they were born and they're stuck to you, and allow that to not disappear, and that's the first aspect of it. That's the first importance when it comes, the main importance when it comes to having the respect between the child and the parent. Because as they say, you know, if you want respect, you have to give it, you know. And it applies to us as parents before it applies to the children, you know. I mean, this is the idea here. So it's a big topic, but it's multi-layered, and we kind of approach it, we have to approach from both angles, you know, in that sense. Because even if the child is the worst of child, if the parent gives them the respect all the time and they still disregard it, there's always an instance in which that child is going to feel that respect, you know, and it's going to kind of change him or shake him at least. You know, I'm here screaming at my parents and I'm yelling back, but the way they're talking to me, the way they're giving me, respecting me and giving me importance, it's kind of making me contemplate on these things. This is the characteristic of the prophet. The prophet used to be humiliated, you know, even not in the beginning of his bath, after, you know, used to be humiliated by the followers themselves, and he would still tell them, come here and, you know, let me talk to you, let's discuss things, you know, even though he could have yani shunned them, you know. But again, so it's two-sided, and we need to make sure we look at this that way.
And to add to that, I see one of my students, Hassan. Assalamu alaikum. How are you? It's okay. Hassan did. We went to not after in Sahif al-Sajadiyya, the one that's printed, that's one that's translated. At the end of Sahif al-Sajadiyya, there's a book of rights by that goes back to Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam. And Imam al-Sajjad, what's really nice is that it goes through Allah's greatest right, and it goes through all of the rights. And it says the right of the mother. Hassan did the right of the mother, and it was actually really beautiful in the sense that Imam Sajjad says that you will never be able to actually fulfill that right to the mother unless Allah Azza wa Jal helps you. Like it needs a divine help in order to fulfill that right. But here's the thing: then some of my kids were actually, they were astonished that there was a right of the child, and that the right of the child also has rights over the parents. And if, from my experience, if I want to say going through Kashif, now with GRA, just living my life, just experience, seeing people, knowing people who are parents and so on and so forth, I would say one of the things is that there is, it's the rights are not being upheld, but on both sides. So sometimes we're kind of, we want to be gloomy, we want to say it's just the kids and this generation doesn't understand and things like that. It's also the older generation that bears the responsibility of education. You guys, it's the kids that need to be educated. You guys have to educate. You have to, we have to, not you, we. We have to educate. We also have to care for them. We have to give them those rights. And sometimes those rights are not met, even for the kids. And so it's going back to, right, even, subhanAllah, the very last ayah in that constitution that Hassan Zada Almani mentions, it says, وَالَّذِينَ يَقُولُونَ رَبَّنَا هَبْ لَنَا مِنْ أَزْوَاجِنَا وَذُرِّيَّاتِنَا قُرَّةَ أَعْيُنٍ وَاجْعَلْنَا لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. That idea that hierarchy is there, that hierarchy is there, and that concern for the offspring and the wives and so on and so forth is there. And so we have to go back to that hierarchy. We have to go back to what Islam says. But ultimately, I think everyone has to recognize what they have to do on their part. It's not just I think the kids, if you want to say the youth have a much lesser responsibility.
it's we have the greater responsibility to care for them.
Any other questions? You raised your hand first, or start in the back?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
If you can speak to we as a people here, Lebanese Arabs in the United States, have seen a great accumulation of wealth and autonomy in this country. If you can speak to the aspect of wealth and just the power that it has and how kids are affected by it, meaning that people that have businesses and
Yeah.
a great deal of money and how it affects the interaction of kids and parents.
Yeah. I'll mention a story. So I can't. I mean, you have to go to. We have to talk to. So yeah, I think part of it is to talk to experts and have that discussion under a very like kind of where it's a conversation that has a lot of depth. That you're bringing a lot of experts, a lot of people with a lot of experience. But if just to kind of answer, to kind of start answering that question, having that conversation, that discussion with you guys here tonight, one of the weirdest things that I came across was the fact that when I was in Qom, I had friends who were from Pakistan. And like if you're from Pakistan living in Iran, you're not well off. Like you don't have much. And so there was one, his name was Fida Hussein, and he invited me to his house. He got married, so he invited me to his house. He was living in it was a one-room house there was like kind of a curtain that kind of separated the kitchen from the bedroom. And then it was just simple, very simple. So he invites me into his house, and he made me custard, like, right? He made me the food. The food was a bit spicy, but he put a lot of stuff right on the table. And how generous he, look at that generosity. And that was something you experienced on a daily basis, right? With people who don't have amounts of wealth and haven't accumulated wealth and have businesses and so on and so forth. And then I came back here, and we have family, friends, and things like that have a lot of businesses that accumulated wealth. And you come and you almost feel like you're being kicked out of the house. You go and you visit them, you visit certain people, you're almost being kicked out of the house. Like, even to some point, I know people that are making a lot of money and they start complaining about not having enough money and not being able, and that's why they're not inviting people to barbecues anymore, and they're not doing this, and it's not like how it used to be, and the old days are gone. You guys are making over 100,000. Like, I'd go, you guys are making over $100,000. Like, how is it that you're thinking this way? I was with someone like Fida Hussein, who's nothing, probably not $100, probably not even $100 a month. And the generosity is there, and the simplicity is there. So what I've seen from in general is that sometimes also the wealth can kind of take and distract you from different things. And Iran, one of the most beautiful things about Iran was the simplicity. You'd find people who just get a picnic table, like a picnic, just like a picnic bag. I don't know, you know what I'm talking about, right? Everyone who's been to Iran knows what I'm talking about. They have the shai, they have the thermostat like ready to go, and then they just sit in circles. The whole family, kids, young, like 5-year-olds, teenagers, and then you have the husband, the wife, and then the brother-in-laws and everything, and then all the way up to the grandfathers. And they're just all sitting next to the haram or under the shade of a tree, and they're all just taking some cheese, some bread, some biscuits or something. I don't know what they have, but they always have shai. And they're just sitting there. And it doesn't replicate itself here. So in some ways, wealth can be also a distraction. Bottom line is this: it's not a bad thing in itself, but can it distract you? Yes, it can distract you. One, obviously, the obvious thing that you're, as a father or a mother, you're not at home because you're generating a lot of wealth. Number two, I think, is because you start to think that now I can start giving my kid, right? You think of like a PlayStation, you think of I got him, he has an iPad, he's in football, he's in soccer, he's in all of these things, and these are great things. No bad thing. But these are, in many ways, might distract him from that from building and being together as a family as well. So that's just a few things that I have to say.
I'll just add one small point when it comes to wealth. So it's very rare, but you do see it. Yeah, there are people out there that are wealthy, but they do bring that type of environment towards you. That comforting, that welcoming environment. And I think the main idea here is because usually the idea when what attaches to wealth is this type of lifestyle which is luxurious, you know. It's luxury, it's class. So you have to act a certain way, you have to make sure everything around you is a certain way. Yeah, so things like this kind of affects your akhlaq as well. Yani you don't mean to, but because of the nature of the lifestyle you're living, it automatically comes out like this. One 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 day, there were four kids, and the dad is driving a very expensive Mercedes S500, yani a top class Mercedes. The leather in there is yani top class by itself. So the kids are coming into the car, and they're kids. Yeah, and one is four, one is looks like he's seven. You know, the older one is sitting up front. But the kids in the back, how do you expect them to enter the car? Yeah, they threw themselves. He started hitting them. You know, get your feet off the leather. Get your, put your feet down. So that type of interaction could be avoided either by not having something luxurious, or if you have something luxurious but you don't care for it as much as you care for other things like the feelings of your children or things like this, so that's why it comes, you have to actually weigh it, if you're living that high end of the lifestyle, make sure that it's not the priority, because this way people won't look at you based off of your money or your wealth or your environment or your high class. They're looking at how you use it or how you interact around it. And on the other end, yani, even some people, they do have this wealth, but because they find it troubling on them to kind of hold those things and not act in a good way, they get rid of it. They wear the simplest of clothes, for example, they go out. So again, it just depends on how you maneuver around it or how you utilize it in that way.
Wait, Sheikh Sami, there's a hadith, the famous hadith by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "حب الدنيا رأس كل خطيئة," that the attachment to this world, love for this world, is the source of all error. So if you wanna like kind of, if we're trying to think of ways and strategies to kind of, how do what do these manners matter, and what about the relationship between families and so on and so forth, you can easily put that hadith and start say, okay, well, what's the source? The source of all error is that attachment to that world. So that luxury lifestyle and things like that, again, it's not bad in itself. Islam doesn't condemn in many ways wealth. It doesn't at all. It's one of yani, but what it does, what you could say is that attachment to the point where now I'm starting, I get angry with my kid because he put his, something on on a very expensive, leather. That's when I think, it's that attachment to these material things that can really, that could be the source of corruption. That could be the source of the problem. Or even I'll be honest, in aham taqdeem al-muhim ala al-aham, that idea of priorities. I know a lot of people. I know people that have, gone to and said that I need to make $100,000 or $200,000 a year because I want to travel with my kids and I want to take them to, I want to take them to Greece and Italy and so on and so forth. And that's a great thing. Alhamdulillah. Like that would be nice, Like who doesn't want to go to Italy, right? But well, so maybe only you. I'll go eat pizza in Italy if I had the chance to. Like it's not a problem, right? But now imagine, there's good pizza in here. It's better than the Iranian pizza. But when you're thinking of it, it's like, okay, but then, those 10 years went by and you haven't gone to Italy. And now you spent so much time chasing wealth that you haven't spent time with your kids. Spending time, I think, spend even just that quality time, that down to earth time, caring for your kids, 100%. Sheikh Sam.
Yeah, I guess I'll add something maybe to that topic. A question that I have is, a lot of times from the youth's perspective, there's a lot of influencers that, especially in America, that put so much emphasis on wealth to the point where kids value wealth above everything else, and then they start to listen to that influencer in all facets of life.
Yeah.
So maybe if you guys can comment on how to separate the wealth from the merit of what people can offer, and not just generally look at everyone wealthy as someone that can offer you something meaningful.
Yeah.
Okay. How much can I add to it? Depends on how much time we have left. Is there a word limit?
There's 200.
Okay, so in regards to what Sayyid Ali mentioned,
You're a
specifically
Sayyid.
social media.
You're a Sayyid. That's Sayyid. Assalamu
Uh, okay, well, I have another question after, so I'm gonna skip straight to the social media part. We know that خاصة given the demographic of who's sitting here right now, we know that social media is of high consumption.
Yeah.
Like we're probably one of the highest consumers.
Yeah.
The younger you get, it sort of exponentially increases in a sense. We also know that social media has positives and negatives. You can benefit and you can sort of lose from it. You can also have those influencers that, for example, Said Ali mentioned is, they'll give you a little bit of good and then they'll poison it with something bad. They blur the lines. You get poisoned honey. You've got popularity is a strong factor in whether you're fed something or not. How do we shift away from that addiction? And it's not so much about we sometimes we try to cope. We say, oh well, I want to take what's good and leave what's bad. Well, given that we're not experts, how do we discern that? خاصة the younger ones. And I consume social media just like anyone else.
Yeah.
How do I, as not a non-expert, discern the good from the bad? And given that we know it's not the greatest source, what are better sources? Where we say respect your parents? What does that mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean? How do I respect my parents? Speak better, respect the Quran. What are the adab? I know you mentioned Sunan al-Nabi. I know you mentioned adab al-salat. I don't know if you'd recommend everyone to read, for example, adab al-salat. That's a question. And Sahif al-Sajjadiyya has the treatise on rights. What are the figures that we look for? Where do we find authentic or proper role models for these adab that we keep talking about, besides social media and Andrew Tate?
Who's Andrew Tate?
I'll just start with a small comment. What you mentioned is 100% true, and I think the main idea here is that we're living in a type of fallacy, in a sense, where it's understanding what are the techniques that are posed by social media or influencers or trends. For example, if you come and you dissect Andrew Tate, like you mentioned it, right? That's what I heard. Okay. We see that one thing he does, and this is how he grabs the attention of the viewers, even us Muslims, he grabs our attention too, is because he speaks key principles. He speaks universal principles. A man should be a man, a woman should be a woman. Things like this that kind of adapt to society and build upon that social hierarchy that's there. Okay. Now the difference is, what are the specifics under those titles? Those are the things that affect us the most, because we might agree now with the key concepts or the anawin as they put out there, but then we fall into that fallacy that the specifics that they're giving us, because the title is right, then the examples they're given must also be right. So this is the idea here this is the problem that we're falling into. And we start imitating them because they speak truth in terms of titles. Then we start imitating them in practice, in example, because now we want to be those titles. So if he's speaking those titles, then we need. So where do we lack? Yes, we lack one in influencing people ourselves. Having people that need to be out there to counter these ideas, kind of show or present those fallacies to the public. One problem we have as especially Shia audience, is we don't have public speakers. I don't mean people that go up on the podium, just like this only, but people that are out there in society, people that go up into the media, people that are in parks or in gatherings and social events, whether it's protests, universities. Oh my God, that's just a disaster itself right now. I do not see, rarely, any Shia clubs or Shia individuals inside of university clubs.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem right now. These are all concepts in which we just are laying back, putting one foot over the other, and basically complaining about what's out there instead of being proactive. When it comes to society, you kind of want to work on your individual self first, but society is moving so fast that you can't just work on yourself only right now. Like, it has to be multitask. You need to work on your family now and the people around you. You're now taking on these individual work tasks with other organizations, and you're trying to now build your family and their family. And now you're like, there's 50 other families and you're struggling with your family. How are you gonna tackle all these things? It's because we lack the resources. There hasn't been a unified movement when it comes to Shiism in the West, you know, where we can express our ideas in this sense. And again, I say it, school is the biggest institution when it comes to influencing people, whether it's in the public sector or in universities. How do ideas such as political, topics like Gaza and all these things, how are they being addressed the most? Where do you see them addressed the most? They're not in news outlets. They're on these protesting grounds. They're on university grounds, things that can have the most outreach, in a small span of time. And these are things that we need to kind of analyze and try to, you know, um, adapt to. So again, in order to defeat the influencer, you have to be an influencer, and we're not doing that influencing right now during our time, around, like in this Western culture. At least we're not doing that influencing. We see, mashallah, yani the Sunni brothers, they're top notch when it comes to this. They're out there. Sometimes if I want to reference someone, I'm referencing a Sunni brother. If I, just because the way they're speaking to the public, they're speaking to them. There's no one to reference or listen to this lecture or this rebuttal. And at the same time, it's not really giving the message that you want to give, right? Because it's not you doing it. So this is a big dilemma right now that we're in.
But it's not. I don't think it's not just. It's not you. I think there's a lot of question marks about that, the messages or the type or the behavior that they're also exhibiting, as well. What I would say is this: you asked, for example, is it something? Do we recommend, for example, that everyone read Adab al-Salat, Sayyid al-Imam? He read it. He wrote it for a general audience, so that's debatable. But put that aside, right? Go to the Quran. That's why I said, if I can give one thing, it's that invitation that we all go to Surah Al-Furqan and go and start with Ibadullah, right? Ibadur Rahman. And it says here, it says, وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَشْهَدُونَ الزُّورَ وَإِذَا مَرُّوا بِاللَّغْوِ مَرُّوا قِرَامًا. So that when that laghu, that anything, if you go to Allama Tabatabai, when I was reading some of his commentary, he was in Ahl al-Ma'siyah. When you're thinking of the influencers, when you're thinking of, like, in the past, it was a little bit more restricted to celebrities, like, the singers and pop artists and things like that. Now it's a little bit more expanded, but it's all that same thing. Ahlul lahu, Ahlul Ma'siyah. And so what does the believer do? When he passes by them, he passes with dignity. And that qarama, when you think of qarama, you think of that dignity, that inherent human dignity. That's the fountainhead of that tarbiyah. If we're looking for manners. I was just remember because he said something about. I completely agree with Sheikh Sami when he said that we need people in the universities. Imam Musa Sadr, I was reading about him, and the AUB, in that western enclave of Beirut, the AUB, the American University of Beirut, right? It was dominated by Marxists, by communists, by everything anti-Islam. Everything but Islam was there. For someone like Sayyid Musa Sadr, this tall, charismatic figure, to walk into a school like that and lecture people about Islam. And you know what the lecture was that I was reading for him? That Qaramat al-Insan. And he was saying something. I'll go real quick because it's beyond the scope of this lecture. But this idea that tarbiyat al-Islamiyya, that tarbiyah that we have, the education that the adab that we should be giving to the people, it shouldn't be based on unuf. It shouldn't be based on compelling them, fear. It should be based on that inherent dignity of a human being. And so yes, we need people in those universities, but I would recommend the Quran, and I would also recommend in the general that we should be passing by them. It's almost like, should we even engage with them? Should we mimic them? Should we copy them? Or should we just completely ignore them as believers? and as believers with dignity. So that would be my just in some ways ignore them.
Shouldn't be all about problems. They want to go back to adab salat, but as long as one builds himself gradually.
Yeah, everything. Yeah, أكيد Hajj.
I
أكيد.
just want to point out the last point. Again, when it comes to titles, they're doing society here in the West is doing that job for you. They're telling the kids how to have dignity, how to have honor, you know. But the way they wrap it is in a way that kind of pulls you away from Islamic concepts or that specific principles that you hold. You know, like if you go into the schools right now, you know certain terms that are very popular. If you ask the high schoolers right now, oh, why are you talking back to a teacher? Because it's a sigma thing to do, you know, or you know, I'm an alpha or whatever it is. You know, these are the terms that they use and kind of inject those principles in there. Whereas you talking back to a teacher, for example, in essence, is what harming your honor and your dignity. You know, things like this. So we kind of want to pay attention to these ideas and really reflect on them when we talk about them.
So I'm going to get another real quick, but both of you sort of segued perfectly into my question. We know that in general, from our principles and our understandings, is that, or from the tenets of our faith, and no, what matters effectively in reality is our status amam Allah, right? Our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of that is our status in society, part of that is our respect and our dignity and so on and so forth. All of those behaviors are part of that. But given that we live in a society that is now at this point based on those influencers, based on what you're talking about, where it's sigma to talk back to people, it's of high caliber. You're
What's sigma? Just
sigma's. It's a long conversation. This is internet speak. How do I summarize sigma? Sigma is effectively you're a man's man. You're literally top G. You're perfect human being. You're untouchable.
Okay.
I don't know. But in general, we live in a society that is the opposite of our principles.
Yeah.
And we know that what really matters is, again, the status of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our status in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, given that's the case, do we adjust our behavior? Should we have an external state when we deal with a society that does not value respect? It doesn't value talking to parents the correct way. When you said your students are like, what do you mean he put his cheeks on his feet? That's weird. Because the society doesn't respect that. It has nothing, it doesn't matter to it. Do I, for example, behave differently in response to that society versus my internal state?
Yeah.
Having respect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
I mean, when I'm looking at this, I'm looking at habits, customs, conventions, so on and so forth in society. One of the things that
Is it true that society doesn't recognize the respect, or is it the media that making us believe that?
No, I don't think, obviously, I think I mean, at the end of the day, human nature, like if the idea of respect and respecting your father, I think that's something that society wants to promote, whether you're kind of atheistic or you're Islamic or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's the matter of what's actually like, what's being promoted, that individualism that Sheikh Sami has been talking about. It doesn't yield those results. It yields a result where, when I'm older and my father needs to be under the care of my care, I'm going to put him in some place. I'm going to pay a monthly fee, but he's out of my house. He's not going to be in my house with my family and my kids. So individualism doesn't yield those results. I don't believe it yields those results. But to answer your question, the ulama, the urafa, in some ways, and they go to some extremes. This depends on how close do you want to be to Allah Azza wa Jal. But in the ayah that comes to mind is وَيُجَاهِدُونَ فِي اللَّهِ وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. I believe I got the ayah. وَيُجَاهِدُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ عفوا وَيُجَاهِدُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ وَلَا يَخَافُونَ لَوْمَةَ لَائِمٍ. أحسنت حاج. So this idea that they don't, it's almost like you're gonna, by giving up the habits and the customs and the practices and the ways and the habits of society, people are gonna look at you and say you're a majnoon. You're giving up on these, you're shunning them. And the Quran says it. They don't mind it. They don't worry about the blame of those who are going to blame them. They're gonna بعد شوي, right? They're gonna say this and they're gonna say all of these things. "Amma, you're gonna lose your social standing. You're gonna do this. You're gonna do that." So I do believe no. And I don't know if Sheikh Sami disagrees with me, and it's very possible. But it could be that we do require in many ways as mu'mineen, if we really want to carry the kind of the burden, not the burden, but we want to carry the responsibility on our shoulders. It is going to require a lot of it's going to be radical. Radical in which way? Hala, it's going to require something. It's not going to just be passive at all. It's not going to be like I'm just going to go and live life normally and then I'm just going to be okay with it, because everything we're fish in what? We're fish in bad water, so to speak. We're fish, we're mu'mineen, and everything around us is individualism, atheism, secularism, pushing religion away, pushing Allah Azza wa Jalla away. It almost seems right. It seems very right, almost out of the ordinary to be a mu'min.
I think I think the main idea that you want to
So same idea, but how do we apply it in
So,
action, especially when it comes
yeah.
to kids? They want to fit in.
Yeah.
They want the expensive shoes. They want, the latest iPhone. Is there even such a thing as healthy screen time? Do we allow that at all?
Can we ask us?
So I'll
I guess I'm just simplifying.
yeah, I'll
what the
answer
brother
both
is,
of them in a sense. I think when it comes to today's age, we focus a lot on, especially when it comes to Islam, we need to adapt as society adapts as well. What do I mean by that? We're no longer in an age where us as Muslims are entertained by, theological concepts or, jurisprudential concepts, tahara, najese, even if we're speaking about God, these philosophical ideas that are out there, they don't interest the kids within society right now. The main idea that we want to promote to the kids is the social aspect of Islam, because it is a social religion. We want to promote the idea of just being good. How can you be the best you can be? How can you be the best child you can be? How can you be a good person? So by automatically being a good person, good traits are coming out of you. Character traits are coming out of you. So in essence, you are becoming closer to God because you're resembling these character traits. You're becoming good. If you're generous, that's a character trait of God. You're becoming closer to God by embodying that character trait. If you're working hard, not being lazy, if you're trying to succeed, if you're trying to accomplish things, if you're trying to communicate with others in a proper way, these are all traits that bring you closer to God because they are His traits. In essence, they are His traits. When it comes to these ideas that kind of we shun away from and we give leniency to our children because it is the environment around them, we need to now kind of analyze, why are they in this environment? Do we have another choice or not? Um, I'll say it, and I'll say it blatantly. Yani, if public school, if not now, very near in the future, could be close to haram, 100%. Yani, I'll say it as it is. It's very difficult right now. I've worked in the public school sector. I've worked with Access. I've taught at public schools, high schools, middle schools. Different schools. I've seen what I've seen, where the atmosphere there changed someone like me who's been in house 7-8 years. It had an effect on me. There were 7-8 years in my life where I did not hear a swear word. Okay, I went to the public sector. Not only was I hearing it, but 1 month in, if I get bothered by something, the first thing that comes to my mind is a swear word. So imagine, this is me coming from the house afresh. Imagine the kids that are now there on a daily basis. So we need to really think about the environment which we place our kids in. Some might not be able to afford the private sector, but we need to. It is wajib on us to plan for our children now, today's age, from the day they are born, before they're even conceived. Am I able to bring this child into a world that I know they'll be comfortable in? These are ideas we need to think about. There's people right now, I know they homeschool their children because they're not able to put them in private sector, you know. But again, this is just one example. There's other things, you know. Do we know the people that we're sending our children to, their house, you know? There's instances where relatives, blood relatives, could be problems for your children. Their cousins, you know, their distant relatives, even. These can affect you and your child in a way. I've seen so many examples. I don't want to give details right now, but these are all things that I've seen in reality. We need to ask the question, why do we need to make them comfortable based on what's around them, you know? The main question is, should they be there or not?
Yeah, to kind of, but just to kind of give a little bit of positive, like a sort of a, let me just kind of give it like what I think is very hopeful. I met an atheist, a Muslim, who became an atheist. And we talked a little bit, and he just wasn't like, he wasn't convinced. So I said, okay, fine, but do me a favor, stay close to your family. I just say, stay close to your family. Don't go on this whole right, this become this sort of, right, you know, atheist Jedi, you know, where you want to convert everybody, right? Just stay close to the family. Don't hurt your mother's feelings. Don't, you know, just come. And he did that. And because of that, a few years later, he became a Muslim again. I did it again. There was another same situation. That's the only advice I gave the person. Just stay close to the family. A few years later, he came back. So what I would say is, how does that translate with our kids? Make home the best place possible. Make home where they're never gonna find a place like home, ever, and keep them close. And then if, subhanallah, if you know something happens, and subhanallah, it's people are going to fall through the cracks. But I did I cared for them. I brought them close. Make home the best place possible. Not necessarily.
Controlled environment.
Not necessarily.
Controlled
Yeah.
environment. You monitor and know what they're going through on a daily
Yeah,
basis.
that's Sheikh Sami's answer. What I was trying to say is that
But-
I personally, I would take society based on what our ulama have said. Just kind of, I know this might seem like a little bit too much, but I wouldn't use them as the kind of sort of the metric. I would take them, the standard, the sort of something like society. I don't care about society's needs. I care about I want this human being to reach its full potential, and that is Abdullah, Ibadur Rahman, Abdur Rahman in many ways. I want him to reach that full potential. And also in this immediate world as well. I want him to be successful. I want him to be if it's a boy, I want him to be a successful father, husband, so on and so forth. And if it's a daughter, then I want them to go to get an education. I want them to be healthy and so on and so forth. But I would put society, whatever society needs, I wouldn't even regard that. I wouldn't even consider it.
I just want to mention this last point. So it's good to expose them to society. You know, they need to see what's out there. But at the same time, it needs to come with guidance.
Yeah.
It's not just throwing them out there and expecting them to realize these things themselves. That's why when I say controlled environment, you're there with them all the time. When I mean there with them, you know, just something small I did. And I think some of the guys part of they didn't know it was an experiment, but I just kind of did it. Now they know they're part of an experiment. I was my children were watching something on TV, and it was PBS Kids. PBS Kids, yeah, PBS Kids, yeah. And the show was Arthur. You know, sometimes I'm not fully there. I'm working or doing something, but most of the time I try to be attentive in a way just to see what, you know. I don't trust everything that's there. So a certain clip came up, and I'm like, hold on, they said something in there. And again, it's that message, you know, it's slowly but surely it gets to the child. And it kind of, as I was mentioning, how I was, you know, how I became part of this swear words and this culture that was in the public school, you know, in my mind, the child also is adapting to this type of ideology through what they watch or what they're exposed to. So I said, man, let me throw this clip out there. I want to see the reactions. So I threw it out there to the group, and everyone was like, whoa, what's going on here? What's happening? You know, how did he saying this? So I'm making sure that it's not just me looking into a little bit more, but imagine what we see as something taboo and something bad. We're letting our children be exposed to it on a daily basis, and these are channels we're supposed to trust. We're supposed to trust. So again, it's controlled environment. It's really understanding what's happening around the child. It's very dangerous these days. It's very, very dangerous.
See how everything right now there's a war in the Middle East, and we've been listening a lot about Nasr, idea of Nasrullah. Nasrullah, yani the Quran, yani Nasr min Allah Azza wa Jal. And that idea that if you help Allah Azza wa Jal, that Allah Azza wa Jal, you will prevail, because ultimately you helped Allah Azza wa Jal, and Allah Azza wa Jal is there. Allah موجود بالنهاية. Allah موجود خلاص. Anyway, that idea of tawakkul with sabr and all that other stuff, but the idea of having that intention. I personally believe if your intention is to help your kids to the best of your ability, that's what you're asking Allah Azza wa Jal for, and that's what you strive for, then أكيد Allah Azza wa Jal is going to help you. أحسنت. فطبقوها هلا مش بالمعركة هي في عندنا قد ما بدك مصاديق، قد ما بدك مصاديق، بدنا نطبقها على كل المستويات شو اسمه المجتمع.
Okay, so I guess I was gonna say we'll take one more question and end, but then I saw the sister's hand. So maybe we'll take two more questions and end, because the youth haven't asked many questions, and I saw a
You guys
young
are
man's
hungry?
hand, so I'd love to hear what he has to
Is
say.
hungry?
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alhamdulillah.
In the beginning of the discussion, you talked about manners that you should have towards the imam in the mosque, and you also talked about exposing your kids to a good environment and making sure they're in a good environment. But how do you feel about bringing your kids to the mosque during Friday prayer and lectures, and they're being very rowdy and loud and making it so other people may not be able to focus? And to add on to that question, I have some friends. I try and bring them to the mosque, and they say it feels like a business meeting. They feel like they're sitting up so straight. They can't be themselves. And you talked about a balance. So how do you balance it without you can still be yourself? You don't feel like you're stuck in a bubble, but you're also treating the mosque with respect. What advice would you give that person?
It's a hard one.
I'll try until you think of something. So when it comes to these, again, it's on different levels. So you kind of have to analyze the level you're talking about or the situation the person is in. Especially when it comes to a spiritual state, you don't want someone to get involved in something that they don't have an affection for or an interest for. Taking someone to the mosque based off of force is counterproductive. It kind of defeats the purpose. So now you have to think about a way to kind of transition that person into it. Could be just sit at home and let's listen to something, for example. I'm driving my car the other day, and it was something nice because I saw a garage was open, and they had two guys that were, I would say, not more than college students, maybe even argue high schools. They're sitting and they have a scholar on the TV in the garage, and they're just sitting there and watching, and they're smoking arguida. So most likely they're college students. But they've created a comfortable environment, but they're benefiting from it in a way. So you kind of can now transition them if you speak to them a little bit. Let's take this a step further. Maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, we'll go out to the mosque, kind of get involved in the activities there. Because when it comes to spiritual state, you don't want to put a lot of ta'il, as they say, on the person, because the spiritual state is like the physical state. Just like if someone is going through, if you're weightlifting and you're trying to build a physique, it takes time. You have to go through steps. You start. Even though you can hold that 30-pounder, let's say, dumbbell, not the bench. But if you can hold a 30-pounder dumbbell, you're not recommended to start with it. Sometimes you just start with the 5 or the 10, and then as you get used to it, you build up into that state or physicality that allows you to not strain yourself when you do it. Same thing with the spiritual aspect also. So if you find that someone's uncomfortable, see where you can find a middle ground. See where they're comfortable at, and kind of find that middle ground over there. When I started going the Hawza, and it might sound weird, this is a personal thing, I'm not applying it to others, yani, but I wasn't advised to pray, for example, Salat al-Layl, or do these spiritual acts that a lot of people would do, or you would think that they would do in their years at the Hawza, you know. It wasn't until 2 years into the Hawza studies that I was actually now advised to start praying, you know, not the full Salat al-Layl, but just the 2 rak'ahs, you know, of Salat al-Layl. And again, because you're going through a spiritual training, you know, you're trying to get comfortable and understand that there's groundwork you need to build before you start at these levels. Because just as you do it, as easy as you can do it, you can lose it if you don't train yourself to get there, you know, in that sense. So these are very important things. You don't want to go to the mosque for every day for a month and then all of a sudden cut it cold turkey, you know, and not go there anymore. So build it up, you know, kind of see how what interests are there and build it based off of those foundations.
Yeah, I would piggyback on what Sheikh Sami said. There's an entire chapter in Al-Kafi, one of our major books of hadith, Al-Mudarat. And in that hadith, there's a story where someone in the time of the Imams, someone converted, became a Muslim. And so his neighbor would take him every single day to the masjid, every single day to the jami. And then the guy left Islam. And the Imam goes, it's your fault. I mean, right? So it's this idea of like, you know, it's like my friend doesn't go, he doesn't weight lift, and I take him every single day. He's gonna hate it. And so you don't want to force that on someone. You want to بدك تداري. You know what? You know, بدك تداري شو اسمه؟ بدك تداري نفسك بدك تداري. When it just come from a personal, it kind of share something from just a personal thing that I have. I didn't have a religious upbringing, but one of the things I still remember is going to Lebanon, or even here, the old ICA, right, on Joy. I still remember vividly in my imagination me waiting for. I remember we were in the Day'a and there was no kahraba, there was no nothing, there's no electricity, there's nothing. And you just go to the masjid, you go up to the village on the top where the masjid is at, and you just were under the shade of the tree and we're waiting for salah because there was nothing to do. But those were the funnest moments where we were just kids in the courtyard in the masjid. Or for example, in Dua Qumail, I still remember it in the Dahi, going to those, being in the masjid, or at the ICA. So I wouldn't discourage kids. This idea that if kids are a little bit, obviously we have to play our role. Everybody has a role as a parent to make sure our kids are behaved and things like that, so they're not disturbing. But this idea that we tell our kids not to come to the masjid, I don't think that's something that I'm hesitant, because there might be something in some area that I'm not thinking about that might, you know, there might be a hadith or something that might say otherwise. But to the best of my knowledge, as of now, what I can say is no. I wouldn't discourage kids from going to the masjid and playing in the masjid. Remember Mahdiyyah? Oh my God, Mahdiyyah, when in our neighborhood in Qom, where all the talaba used to live, it was a zoo. But the Sayyid that used to pray there, and he was an alim, the Sayyid that used to pray there would always have candy just like stacked in his, right? But I would go there and it would be so hard to pray because the kids would just be running around everywhere. But you could look at them and you know that this is the best moments of their lives. They literally, they play soccer until adhan comes, and then they all rush into the musalla. You don't feel, and that's all the talaba are there, and this is Qom. And then you have the Sayyid, this old Sayyid that just has candy and he's just giving everybody candy. So it might not be good for us, but for them, that's the best years of their life.
And I wouldn't disregard also that there is importance and emphasis that needs to put on the jawama and the muassasat themselves. You know, they need to really strive to try to bring in the people more. And I think they're struggling with this because there's a big gap between that age and that culture and with the new age and the new culture, you know. Something Sheikh Muhammad Jawad Shiri was very famous for. He told them, do whatever you want, just bring it to the jama at that time, you know. And then once they were there, he kind of, yeah, the stories are there. Yeah, Allah yarham. So the stories are there again, but we just need to find the avenue and the way to bring them towards the jama more.
Yeah, to add, I think, you know, to the brother's comment, like satisfying that playfulness for the youth is very important. Because I could put myself in his shoes as well and say that the programs that satisfy the curiosity and the interest of the youth aren't really there. And like you said, Samahat Sheikh Sami, like it doesn't always have to be like a religious topic.
Doesn't
It
have
could
to
be anything.
What's the biggest
you know?
event that takes place in Dearborn every year? They
maybe
gather
the
the most
Suhoor
people.
festival.
Yes. Why
Yeah.
can't the Jama adopt this?
Exactly. Yeah,
You know?
there's a lot of work that can be
You're
done.
hitting two birds, one stone. You know,
Yeah.
the people that do things that they shouldn't do will feel embarrassed to go to the Jama and do it, so they won't attend. And at the same time, you're attracting all these people towards the Jama. It's a concept that should be studied, Jan, in this sense.
For sure. I guess we'll take one more question from the sister and we'll end.
This isn't a question, but back to the whole keep your kids in the bubble thing. Don't keep your kids in the bubble, but learn how to communicate with them. That's it.
That's
Is
a
it
good
is
point.
it like yeah, I would
That's
I
a
would
good
agree.
point.
Yeah,
no,
yeah, I would
that's a
agree.
good point.
Definitely, I would agree.
Agree.
Thank you for not having a it's very difficult sometimes to sit here. Thank you guys for listening. I mean, I just imagine that it's like the sort of like just listening to someone talk for a long time. Thank you for the opportunity that you guys gave me.
Thank you
And
as
Sheikh
well.
Sami
Yeah,
as well.
thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
Yeah, I guess we'll end first off thanking Sheikh Sami and Sheikh Ali. And also, we will have another program like this in 2 weeks for those that would like to attend. And inshallah, let's end with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم صل على محمد.